Hi everyone. Sorry about the confusion with the previous post getting deleted. I'll blame post-night shift fatigue on forgetting the rule about no multiple stories in one post. So instead I'll expand on the first one I mentioned in that post. A call that James took. I explained to him that I've been sharing some of the creepy calls I've taken, and he was eager for me to share this one with you all. He agreed with me about keeping it quiet for management, hence why none of the names I've mentioned so far are the people's real names, apart from mine, which is Holly. I don't want to fall foul of their social media policy and get in trouble. It may be creepy and weird, but I really need this job. I like having a roof over my head. We don't like heavy breathers. It either means that someone is having difficulty breathing, in which case they're ill, and we don't like anyone being ill, even if it does keep us in a job. Or they're the sort of person that gets their sexual kicks from making emergency calls, also known as boner phoners. I know Tumblr is obsessed with not kink-shaming people, but I'm gonna do it. If your kink is listening to an emergency call handler ask you questions, you should be ashamed. Most boner phoners will just do some heavy breathing and grunting while you ask for the address again and again. Police and fire can hang up, but we can't. Hence why we seem to get all of them. And then there will be a bit of noise, some groaning, and then a perfectly respectable sounding middle-aged man will pick up the phone and say, "Thank you," and hang up, and refuse to answer the phone ever again. We can usually trace them, but unless they're prolific, the police aren't interested. We shrug it off as weirdos and perverts, although it's never nice to realize you've been used in someone's creepy fantasy. James told me about a heavy breather that he took a few weeks ago. They called from a landline, so when they didn't give an address, James was able to select it automatically. Not technically protocol, but he had no way of knowing if someone was having difficulty breathing or not, so it was more important to get help sent out. He sat and listened to the person breathing heavily for ages, putting it through as an unknown problem, because he had no idea if the person was conscious or not. It was a high priority, and he stayed on the line while the crew rushed over. He asked endless questions, tried to get even a smidgen of information. Nothing. Just a constant, steady rate of heavy breathing into his earpiece. This carried on for the 10 minutes it took for the ambulance to reach the patient's home. James was persistent, in fairness to him, and he spent the entire time asking questions. He asked the caller to scratch the handset if it wasn't safe for him or her to speak. Still nothing. Just breathing. He's taken calls before where the person dies while they're on the phone to you, and at first he wondered if that was the case, but the breathing was too even and regular. It wasn't hugely noisy, just heavy. We hear a lot of dying breaths at work. The technical term is agonal breathing. The final breaths of someone who is usually in cardiac arrest. It's a tricky thing because people think the person is actually breathing, but it's an automatic reflex, and it isn't effective enough to keep the person alive. You need to start CPR pretty quickly in these circumstances because it's impossible to tell how many agonal breaths a person will get before they stop breathing altogether. There are a few different types of agonal breathing. Some people make gasping sounds, and their mouths open and close like they're a fish out of water. Sometimes it's snoring or a weird gurgling sound in the throat. The worst for me is the groan. I hate the groan. They played it for us in training, and it made me feel physically sick. It's a really eerie sound. There's probably a recording on YouTube for the morbidly curious, but please don't say I didn't warn you. There are definitely videos of vaginal breathing on the internet. I'm doing my part to educate the masses. And it's worth familiarizing yourself with the signs that an unconscious person's breathing might not be enough to sustain them, just in case. Oh, and learn CPR. We're trained to talk you through the whole process, and you should always call us first to get help on the way. But if you know the basics, it'll make sure that the CPR we're guiding you through is effective and accurate. Anyway, I'll step off my soapbox and return to James's call. This rhythmic, heavy breathing continued, almost like a recorded loop, for ages. As soon as there was a knock on the door from the crew arriving on scene, the call cut off. James attempted to ring back to check that the paramedics were there, but the line was engaged. He wrote it off as one of those things. We get lots of callers who will try weird and wonderful tricks to get an ambulance quicker. Like telling us their boyfriend with a tummy ache is in cardiac arrest and shouting, "He's not dead, you idiot," when we tell them to do CPR. So maybe this was just a new tactic. The paramedic on scene called through a little while later with an update. There was only one person in the house, an elderly man. James asked if the man was okay, as his breathing had sounded labored on the phone and he hadn't been able to speak at all. He said the dispatcher looked white as a sheet as she explained that the man was cold and stiff. He'd been dead for at least 6 hours. This was a 4th floor flat with one entry point. There was no sign of anyone having entered or exited the property in the time the paramedics were there, and the line didn't cut off until they were knocking on the door. So who the hell made the phone call?